Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Psychological Injury. I'm Stephanie Morawski from WorkSafe Tasmania, and I will be your moderator today. Before we start, Before we start, we ask that you take a few moments to read the following slide about information received today. I will now go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's webinar. We have taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presentation by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the webinar. Questions will, however, be addressed at the end of today's presentation. We are also recording today's webinar. Recordings will be made available on the WorkSafe website at the end of WorkSafe Month. At the close of today's webinar, you will also receive a survey on the presentation. We appreciate you providing us with your feedback. I would now like to introduce Jordan Crouch, Vocational Rehabilitation Consultant from IPAR Rehabilitation, to present today's webinar, Understanding Psychological Injury. Jordan has a Bachelor with Honours in Psychological Science with a background in drug and alcohol counselling services and occupational rehabilitation. Jordan currently specialises in recovery and return to work services for job-detached clients with physical and psychological conditions, in addition to job-attached clients with psychological concerns. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that grandiose introduction. As Stephanie has suggested, we're here today to talk about understanding psychological injuries and in particular how they play out in the workspace. So roughly, we're going to have 4 sections. We're going to talk about common psychological injuries and their conditions. We're going to talk about treatment and mental health first aid, mental health and the workplace and sort of why this matters. We're also going to talk about prevention and what we can do post-diagnosis. So I guess a good place to start is really to embed this in some stats, just to provide some context. So why are we talking about this in the first place? You will find a little bit of variation depending on where you go. These stats here are from the World Health Organization. In terms of prevalence, 1 in 5 Australians report having experienced a mental health disorder at some point in the last 12 months, and 45% or nearly half the entire population report having had a mental health disorder at some point in their lifetime. And that variation, you might get a number of sort of 1 in 5 or sort of up to 1 in 6. Mental health disorders are the 3rd most debilitating disease for all Australians after heart disease and cancer. And we also know that suicide is tragically on the rise. So at the moment, the leading cause of death for Australian adults between the ages of 15 and 44 is suicide. And it's the 4th leading cause of death for those aged between 45 and 64. Now, the first time I heard those stats, I was shocked. I think it's illustrative of the size of the impact that mental health has in modern Australia. We know that anxiety and depression are the most common psychological disorders reported by Australian workers, alongside adjustment disorders and post-traumatic stress disorder. So I think before we continue on, a quick note on how we conceptualize mental health is warranted. So it's important to remember that there really is no on and off switch with mental health. You know, just like a virus, you start to get a little bit sick. You might spend some time really sick, and then there is a recovery period where you're not quite through it. It lingers, but it's getting better. You know, mental health works in a very similar way, and I would go as far as to say it's exactly analogous to physical health. It's a continuum, it can be lived with, and it really isn't a fatal diagnosis. And one fundamental point of importance is that poor mental health, just like physical health, happens over time. And I think this is really important. we generally have a stereotype of a single bad event that results in difficulty adjusting afterwards, which is certainly true for some people, and we'll discuss this when in terms of post-traumatic stress disorder. But for the vast majority of mental health conditions, they happen over time and are the results of accumulative factors, and we'll touch on this a little bit later on. So depression, when we talk about mental health, we often talk about how it affects people's feelings, thoughts, experiences, and behaviours, and you'll see those sort of 4 categories represented up there on your screen. So 1 in 6 people will experience depression at some stage of their lives. It's typically characterised as a diagnosis of low mood, loss of interest and pleasure in usual activities. But importantly, it affects different people differently, and people experience different subsets of symptoms. So I've picked out a video that I think is maybe illustrative of the experience of depression that I think would be beneficial for us all to watch rather than listen to me talk on for extended periods about it. So Stephanie, if you could, beautiful.
I had a black dog. His name was Depression. Whenever the black dog made an appearance, I felt empty and life just seemed to slow down. He could surprise me with a visit for no reason or occasion. The black dog made me look and feel older than my years. When the rest of the world seemed to be enjoying life, I could only see it through the black dog. Activities that usually brought me pleasure suddenly ceased to. He liked to ruin my appetite. He chewed up my memory and my ability to concentrate. Doing anything or going anywhere with the black dog required superhuman strength. At social occasions, he'd sniff out what confidence I had and chase it away. My biggest fear was being found out. I worried that people would judge me. Because of the shame and stigma of the black dog, I was constantly worried that I'd be found out. So I invested vast amounts of energy into covering him up. Keeping up an emotional lie is exhausting. Black dog could make me think and say negative things. He could make me irritable and difficult to be around. He would take my love and bury my intimacy. He loved nothing more than to wake me up with highly repetitive and negative thinking. He also liked to remind me how exhausted I was going to be the next day. Having a black dog in your life isn't so much about feeling a bit down, sad or blue. At its worst, it's about being devoid of feeling altogether. As I got older, the black dog got bigger and he started hanging around all the time. I'd chase him off with whatever I thought might send him running. But more often than not, he'd come out on top. Going down became easier than getting up again. So I became rather good at self-medication, which never really helped. Eventually, I felt totally isolated from everything and everyone. The black dog had finally succeeded in hijacking my life. When you lose all joy in life, you can begin to question what the point of it is. Thankfully, this was the time that I sought professional help. This was my first step towards recovery and a major turning point in my life. I learned that it doesn't matter who you are, the black dog affects millions and millions of people. It is an equal opportunity mongrel. I also learned that there was no silver bullet or magic pill. Medication can help some, and others might need a different approach altogether. I also learned that being emotionally genuine and authentic to those who are close to you can be an absolute game changer. Most importantly, I learnt not to be afraid of the black dog, and I taught him a few new tricks of my own. The more tired and stressed you are, the louder he barks, so it's important to learn how to quiet your mind. It's been clinically proven that regular exercise can be as effective for treating mild to moderate depression as antidepressants, so go for a walk or a run and leave the mutt behind. Keep a mood journal. Getting your thoughts on paper can be cathartic and often insightful. Also keep track of the things that you have to be grateful for. The most important thing to remember is that no matter how bad it gets, if you take the right steps, talk to the right people, black dog days can and will pass. I wouldn't say that I'm grateful for the black dog, but he's been an incredible teacher. He forced me to reevaluate and simplify my life. I learnt that rather than running away from my problems, it's better to embrace them. The black dog may always be part of my life, but he'll never be the beast that he was. We have an understanding. I've learned through knowledge, patience, discipline and humour, the worst black dog can be made to heal. If you're in difficulty, never be afraid to ask for help. There is absolutely no shame in doing so. The only shame is missing out on life.
So I think clips like that could be really important. It's really helpful to get an understanding of this often intangible and invisible process. And I really like that there's a particular clip in there. He's sort of pointing and being angry towards someone whilst he's got this black dog behind him sort of gnawing on his hand. And I think it's sort of illustrative of these significant background processes that a lot of us have going on for us at any one time. So given that ability to illustrate, I've done the same for anxiety. Like depression, anxiety affects people differently. And some people experience a particular cognitive anxiety with rushing thoughts that circle over and over, whilst for others it might feel like it inhibits their thoughts and has strong physical associations. But I'll let you watch this video clip, and again, hopefully you'll get an understanding of a little bit about the experience of anxiety.
I've been expecting you. What? Don't tell me you don't recognize me. Oh, still don't know, are you? Let me try and help you with that. I'm the ill ease that you feel when you walk into a crowded room. You know, the hot and cold flushes that confuse you when you're already confused enough. I am the one that raises the whip to your already racing heart. I am the tightening of your chest, the snowballing worries that feel like they might become an avalanche and could just bury you in an instant. My friend, I am the obsessive and I'm the compulsive. I'm the voice, you know, the one. It's always questioning everything you do, everything you think. And I am every single staring eye that watches you. And every one of those places that you try so desperately to avoid. So, now that we have become acquainted, what are you going to do about it?
Now, I wish we had a little bit more time just to go through and discuss some of these clips and experiences and conditions, although we're a little constrained. So if anyone does want to chase me up at some later point, we do sort of half-day to full-day workshops. And this is such a big topic that It's actually a bit difficult to fit it into such a small time, but I think it's really important just to show off those clips, just to hopefully give some people who are unfamiliar with what it might be like to experience some of these conditions a little idea. So post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a particular set of reactions that can develop in people who have been through a traumatic event, and it can be described as either immediate or delayed onset of PTSD symptoms. So in the first few days and weeks after a traumatic event, people often experience strong feelings of fear, sadness, guilt, anger, or grief. And these are normal. These are important human psychological processes to go through. And generally, these feelings will resolve on their own, usually with the support of family and friends. However, if the distress continues, it might mean that the person has developed PTSD or another mental health condition. So people with PTSD often experience feelings of panic or extreme fear, which may resemble those sensations that were felt during the traumatic event. And they typically have four main types of difficulties. So one, reliving the traumatic event. Two, being overly alert or wound up, which results in sleeping difficulties, irritability, lack of concentration. Three, avoiding reminders of the event. So this is avoiding activities, places, people's thoughts and feelings associated with the event. And they also have this sense that they're emotionally numb. They lose interest in day-to-day activities. And finally, adjustment disorders, often misdiagnosed and mistaken for anxiety and depression, and indeed operate very, very similarly. However, it's an unexpected or maladaptive reaction to a specific stressful event or stressor or change in someone's life. The reaction occurs usually within 3 months of the event or change, and unlike anxiety or depression, once the stressor or its consequences have been removed, the symptoms typically don't persist for more than an additional 6 months. Oh. And we'll catch up with our slides. So there's a number of typical treatments that people who have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder they might be exposed to. By far, the golden standard and the most typical pathway for people is through CBT, or cognitive behaviour therapy. Now, CBT is actually a huge umbrella term. Mindfulness, acceptance and commitment therapy, motivational interviewing, dialectical behaviour therapy, and a huge range of others all sort of fall under the umbrella of CBT. Now, really, it's about recognising the relationship between our thoughts, feelings, and behaviour, identifying what thoughts, feelings, and behaviours we want to change because they're not helpful or adaptive or just aren't in line with the way that we want to live our lives, and putting in place strategies to address them. So it's this idea that cognition reinforces our behaviour and our behaviour reinforces our cognition. Of merit and worthy of a note is EMDR, which is another common treatment for PTSD and really is becoming, if not already is, one of the gold standard treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder. EMDR is for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Wish we had enough time to go into it today. So again, follow up with me if you're interested. So cognitive behaviour therapy at its crux recognizes that maladaptive thoughts and behaviours lead to poor outcomes in our experience and feelings, and it describes a number of strategies that we may use to correct these. So problem solving really is a skills-based therapy. It's around structured problem solving that helps identify the problem, develop and select a solution, implement the solution, and evaluate its helpfulness. Exposure therapy, you all would have come across at some point in your sort of life in popular media. There is a gradual process of exposure. The person learns to cope more effectively with these fears, and with practice, the anxious response naturally decreases. Cognitive restructuring, a really common tool. It's a technique used by psychologists to help a person challenge negative thoughts and develop more helpful and constructive ways of thinking. Mindfulness-based therapy recognizes that distress really focuses on distress about the experience of anxiety rather than anxiety itself. So the psychologist assists a person to focus on the bodily sensations and thoughts that arise when he or she is anxious. And instead of avoiding, withdrawing, or fighting against these, she remains present and aware of them at all times. So you become better at dealing and coping with these and enable someone to engage more fully with life. Part of a mental health condition is difficulty relaxing. So relaxation techniques are a really common tool used by many mental health professionals. And you can make lots of simple changes to someone's lifestyle to help lower stress. So regular exercise, lowering or eliminating alcohol or caffeine, engaging in enjoyable activities, all of these things are really, really helpful. So a quick note on medication. You'll see up on the screen a list of common medications, but by no means is this a comprehensive list. So each of these come with their own set of side effects, pros and cons, and some will work for some people while some will not. And for most, if not all medications, there is an adjustment period of 4 to 6 weeks that they really have to get over before they experience some of that beneficial effect. A quick note on treating professionals. Really, if we're going to distill the differences between psychologists and psychiatrists, psychiatrists work from a medical model. They are able to provide medication, while psychologists are more invested in a behavioural focus, in a case conceptualization focus, and they cannot prescribe medication. But the two work very, very closely with each other. Psychological first aid, some of you might have come across this before. It's the help given until appropriate professional assistance is received. So it includes basic common sense principles of support to promote normal recovery, helping people feel safe, connected to others, calm and hopeful. And it works exactly like physical first aid. So really, it's more of an approach and a set of principles and styles that can be helpful following a stressful event. So if anyone's got any questions on that later on, you're more than welcome to throw them my way. So I think a really good place to start is to ask, well, why does work matter? What are we all doing here, and why would we bother talking about work? So if we think about it, 30% of our waking hours are spent at work. 30% of our time is spent asleep, hopefully, which means we spend 40% of our time, at home in our personal lives. And if you're all like me, you probably spend a significant proportion of that personal 40% thinking about work, getting ready for work, traveling to work, coming home from work, de-stressing about work, thinking about our next career move to move out of this sort of work. So I think it probably weighs up more to say 50 to 60 to 70% of our waking hours are spent at work or thinking about work. So it's unsurprising that work is one of the single biggest contributors to our mental and physical health. So a little overview of the landscape of mental health claims can give us an idea of the causal factors that contribute to mental health conditions in the workplace. So note the types of mechanisms here. At the bottom, you have more single incident type claims, traumatic events, accidents, and assaults. Whilst at the top, you have more claims that arise from sustained accumulative events. So work pressure, which can be considered a general label for stress, bullying, and exposure to violence. What's interesting here is that everyone accepts the need to design systems of safety that protect against catastrophic single events. And that has obvious merit, and we shouldn't stop it. But if we want to tackle mental health as a whole and all of the costs that it incurs, we also need to focus on the sustained and daily work pressures and interactions of our workforce that by and large result in more mental health claims than those single incident type events. A quick note on what a psychological injury is not. So legislation would state that a diagnosis of stress or a stress condition is not acceptable terminology on a medical certificate. But you as an employer, you have a choice to make. When someone walks in on their workplace medical certificate, they have stress. You have the option of saying, well, go away. That's not in the legislation. We don't have to accept that. Or you can see it as the indicator that it is. I mean, if someone's gone to the trouble of heading to the GP, their own personal time to see their own personal medical professionals to have a conversation about work, it's usually a good indicator that something needs to change in their work life. So I'm very quickly going to run you through a quick theory that I find to be of real use when conceptualizing and thinking about work. So self-determination theory, some of you might have come across it before. It's really about psychological well-being and motivation. So the theory is as follows. The experience of autonomy, so the ability to have some self-direction as to how you organize and operate in whatever space you're in. The experience of competence, so the ability to do something successfully or efficiently. And the experience of relatedness, so to connect positively to the other human beings around you, produces greater motivation and engagement and overall well-being, which then results in increased performance, persistence, and creativity. I would suggest that as a framework to begin to think about improving the mental health of your workforce, considering these 3 basic needs is a really great start. So here's a snapshot of some mental health hazards. This comes from research on mentally healthy workplaces and considering our 3 basic needs to sort of help us make sense of this messy quagmire of variables that might contribute. Poor workplace relationships, that's relatedness. Poor / inconsistent organizational justice, that can be competence and autonomy. Low reward, competence. Poor support, relatedness. Poor change management can be all 3. Low role clarity can be autonomy and competence. It's difficult to know how to succeed when you're not sure what your job is sometimes. So if you do some hunting around and you'll spy these different surveys highlighting different types of mental health hazards, try to think back to our self-determination theory, because it really simplifies the sort of mess that workplace mental health can be sometimes. A really quick note on some of the more cultural barriers that we might have towards workplace mental health. So stigma is a really huge issue with mental health. This is something that the research supports as an issue and something I experience all the time in my professional life, where it's essentially where some kind of concept is held in negative regard by others who perpetuate their belief through words, actions, behaviours. And we'll touch on this in a second, so I'll move on from that one. So there's this idea that change management really relates to the way that we've always done things. So we're biologically engineered to resist change. Change increases risk, and as a species or a creature, we're hardwired with a risk bias. So we're always going to be better at something well rehearsed, and the notion of change usually means moving towards something with fewer tried and true results. So we resist against it. But there's a tension here, though. So we know that no industry is immune to change, and we know that change inevitably has to happen. So the question of how we manage this becomes a real and important one. This culture of toughness, I come across this all the time, really, really common in Australian workforces, and it's this notion that succumbing to just about anything is a sign of weakness, sometimes even physical injuries, but consistently to mental health concerns. In these cultures, it really can be difficult to bring positive work-life balance strategies to the forefront because deprivation and sacrifice are often seen as strength. So I think as managers of our various workplaces, addressing some of these cultural issues are a really, really good place to start. And we'll touch on these in a second. I'm aware that we are perhaps running out of time. So I think it's important to recognise the symptoms and indicators of psychological injuries. So with relative consistency, you can look out for absence and lateness, underperformance, time management difficulties, presenteeism, so this idea that people are present but they're not productive, change in emotionality in the workplace, and interpersonal conflict. There also tends to be an increase in physical injury claims when there's really mentally unhealthy workplaces. And this is often due to the perceived stigma associated with stress claims. Mental health issues often emerge as claims for physical injuries, whilst at the same time employees under stress might be more likely to injure themselves. So prevention and diagnosis, what can we do? So we've got our little little train of arrows that I think is a good starting place. So ideally, we want to promote mentally healthy workplaces. We want to put in policies and practices that prevent or protect against the development of mental health injuries. We need to intervene early when an issue is identified, and we need to support recovery. So a good place to start might be to think, well, what does the idealistic workplace look like? What does workplace utopia look like? These stats are from a large national survey that identified mentally healthy workplaces and then teased apart the consistent features of them. So, having a read through, the very most important, the number one, is that employees would agree that their senior management value mental health in the workplace, closely followed by having access to or awareness of workplace policies, procedures, and practices. Now, interestingly, some of the most mentally unhealthy workplaces had number two. They had access to or awareness of policies, procedures, and practices, but they didn't agree that their senior management valued mental health. It was false promises. That was their workplace culture and climate and perception, which really, really matters. Working part-time and regular hours, so being able to have some work-life balance, no surprise there, as well as working for a small to medium-sized business and for an employer with just one work site, so you get some of that increased relatedness. So this is a Beyond Blue workplace survey, and it breaks down some of the common stigmas and attitudes around mental health. And you'd be surprised to know that these happen all the time. And I constantly walking into workplaces and come up against these again and again and again. Some of these are very Australian in character, but I think as an organisation, again, if we're going to begin to tackle mental health, addressing some of these cultural issues around stigma are some of the best things that we can possibly do. Now, early intervention really is the key here. You get improved diagnosis and treatment, more timely and targeted referrals, a reduction in the individual and organisational impacts of the issue. And I refer your attention back to that choice point that I spoke about earlier with those workplace medical certificates. You have a choice to act early if somebody shows up and says, I am stressed and I've been to my GP to talk about it. So having that conversation, I think, is really, really important. Are you okay? Yeah, pretty much. All right, cool, is not a good conversation. So here's a really rough guide. So starting a conversation in private, stating your concerns. I've noticed, Barry, that you're not the Barry that I'm used to. What's going on? You want to listen to their feelings and avoid giving any advice. We have this inherent writing reflex where we get some information. We say, don't worry, problem solved. Here's the solution. That's not what you're there for. You're there to summarize how it's affected them and try to find out, what have they tried? What are they planning to do? Give them some hope, encourage them to act, seek help, utilize the resources that the organization might provide, say an EAP service. And importantly, you want to follow up with them to listen to how the week has gone, if they've managed to seek further actions. So a few important things here: listen genuinely, make no promises, but follow up on any actions that you do commit to. Continue to reiterate your expectations. So from an organizational perspective, you need to be really clear about what you can and can't do for them. Part of that is encouraging them to commit to treatment, to participate in regular physical activity, maintain a balanced diet, be social. And if you have that relationship, challenge distortions as well. I think a lot of organizations suffer in silence because they're not aware of their organizational risks. And this comes around from having poor knowledge of your risk profile. So there's a lot of free and easy toolkits out there. Heads Up, WorkSafe, Superfriend all have one, and IPAR are also a group that's able to step in and help you create an organizational risk profile. These are some of the recommendations that you might get. And if we look back at our workplace utopia, you'll note how similar and how relevant some of these are to some of the features of mentally healthy workplaces. Again, number one, leadership, showing commitment to mentally healthy workplaces, and lots of elements of modeling psychological self-care. If you're a boss and you need a day off, don't say that you're sick, say that you're going to the beach and having a mental health day. You'd be surprised at the impact that it can have. There are some simple strategies: start conversations, go on, encourage and promote physical activity, go on a walking meeting, and try some team building exercises that don't involve copious amounts of alcohol. It's really, really helpful. And this is pretty much it for me today. I mean, we've got some resources for your employees, various helplines are really, really useful. There's loads and loads of really, really good applications out there that can be beneficial for managing your own personal, physical and mental health, encouraging your EAP services. If you have an EAP service and no one has used it in a year, you're probably not promoting enough. So get out there and make some noise. There's a couple of doubled up squares there, but maybe that speaks to the testament of sort of how important they are. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. That's it. I think we're on to questions.
We certainly are, Jordan. So thank you very much for your presentation. So we will now answer any questions that have been submitted during the webinar, and there is still time for you to submit your questions through the questions pane in the attendee control panel. So we'll go to the first question, Jordan. We're looking at MHFA officers, but one of the areas of pushback is that MHFA officers may make the situation worse. What are your thoughts?
My opinion is that talking about mental health never makes it worse. Ignoring it does. There's some really, really good research, in particular in relation to depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation, that would suggest that talking about it doesn't increase the rates of these types of conditions. You will probably find you are surprised at the prevalence of these conditions in your workforce, and that's more to do with stigma and stereotype and people not feeling comfortable to come out and say what's going on. But surely addressing a problem rather than letting it fester and sit sort of underneath the current of our day-to-day operations, to me seems like a more positive approach. So in my experience, it typically always makes things better.
Thank you, Jordan. Someone has also asked if you're able to provide us with the Black Dog video link.
Yes, definitely. If people are interested, I have I suppose a little resource pack that I'm happy to send through. It'll have the Black Dog link, it'll have the anxiety link, as well as some of those resources for employees at the end as well.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. So there is still time if anyone would like to submit any other questions for Jordan to answer during today's webinar. There is still time to register for other WorkSafe Month webinars and events. So if you head to worksafetasmonth.com.au, you can still register for other webinars and events that we have running up until the 31st of October. So it seems that people are interested in receiving that pack, Jordan. So I will ensure that I get that information off you. And
yeah, definitely.
One other question has come through, Jordan. How can we performance manage a person who also may have a mental health issue?
Really, really good question, and something that I come up against all the time. I mean, I think the very first step is for HR staff to make sure it's a truly understanding and sort of safe space for them. If they have a diagnosable mental health condition, they are typically aware of the variables of relevance for them. So I would be starting some open dialogue and asking, well, how can we do this best for you? What can we look out for? When you're symptomatic, what do I need to look out for? How can I make this process as beneficial for everyone involved? I've been invited into many workplace situations where someone is being performance managed. They do not feel comfortable to talk about the complexities and idiosyncrasies of their own personal mental health, and as a result, it results in confusion. If possible, I would try to speak to their GP or other allied health professionals. If you have workplace injury management advisors or anyone of that nature, they're really well placed to sort of step in and have some of those conversations. But having open dialogue right from the very, very start is going to be the most beneficial way forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Jordan. Another question that has come through: is the percentage of mental health issues today a reflection of our current lifestyle or because of the increased exposure and promotion?
Really good question, and a question that's debated heavily amongst psychologists. I'm doing a residential block this week. I'm a provisional psychologist, and it was a discussion of merit just yesterday afternoon. I guess my personal feelings around this is that it's a result of increased awareness and increased ability to speak about these issues with nuance and complexity and all of these things. We were just discussing some cultural differences in talking about mental health, and you find different cultural groups where traditionally you thought, well, maybe they don't even have a concept of mental health. They talk about it in sort of different and nuanced ways. So for many Asian cultures, it might be, they talk about illness in the body and, affecting these sorts of different areas. But if you really drill down and start to ask them, well, what does that sort of mean to you? They're actually concepts and reflections of mental health that they use in this sort of, cultural lexicon to talk about these issues. It's just that we're slowly developing a more straight to the point language around some of these topics. So I think that it's really an increase in awareness. I'd be very surprised to find out that our lifestyle these days are is more stressful than life has been in the past. I mean, Steven Pinker writes a really interesting book on violence over time. It's really, we are living in the most peaceful, most prosperous age that we've ever lived in, and I'd be really surprised to find that as we go back in history and as life gets more and more difficult, we have decreased rates of mental health. It's just that we're developing new ways and different tools to speak about and conceptualize mental health.
All right, thank you, Jordan. I know how the questions have come through at this stage, so I'll start to wrap up today's webinar. So thank you, Jordan Crouch from IPAR Rehabilitation, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Understanding Psychological Injury. As mentioned, we will attempt to send through the information pack which Jordan mentioned. Today's webinar was also recorded and will be available on the WorkSafe website at the end of WorkSafe Tasmania Month. There is also still time to register for other WorkSafe Tasmania webinars and events running during WorkSafe Month up until the 31st of October, so do head to WorksafeTasmonth.com.au to register for those events. And on behalf of WorkSafe Tasmania and our presenter, Jordan Crouch, thank you for joining us today.
And thanks for having me, Stephanie. And same goes out to the audience. Thanks for tuning in. It's been a pleasurable experience on my behalf, and one that I've enjoyed. So thanks.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.